Yeah. Okay. Well, that was impressive. I knew it was snowing here in Lexington, Kentucky, but I don't know how the guys got that to happen on the screen. But that was very nice, guys. I appreciate it. I've always wanted to say something like this, and now I get the opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our routinely programmed content for an important announcement. And let me give you some background on that, on the announcement that I'm talking about. If you look at the patient experience, even when we started this program 5 years ago, I was still working with MD Live, and then later on with physicians partners in a large Medicare Advantage program. But Janice and I and some other people felt very strongly that folks were not getting the right kind of prevention. I also personally had to learn a deep lesson myself. I had to learn something that Brad Bale taught me. I had always felt like, you know, as a doc, patients understand everything that I understand, and that, you know, you really don't need to focus so much on labs. You just need to tell them what they need to do and they'll do it. Well, you know what? I don't even do that. That was just wrong. So one thing I did learn is this whole concept of telling people, you know what, let's give you a dashboard. Let's help you understand what's going on with your metabolism. Let's not guess anymore. Let's test and see what's going on. So kudos to Brad in that space. But again, Janice and I started this company. I started putting some stuff on YouTube in terms of content. And along with the good comes the bad. And a major part of the bad was lab access and expenses. So I remember when we first we went through this kind of process as patients. And I didn't expect to learn that much. I felt like, again, more physician arrogance. I felt like I already knew what I needed to know, but I didn't. I did learn some significant things about my own health. One of them was that I had plaque, despite thinking I probably didn't. And I shared that in the videos. I also learned that I was developing prediabetes, insulin resistance. Didn't know that either. So there's a lot of value in taking a look. I became a big believer, went ahead and started this company with Janice, and we got eyeball deep into this. We're, 5 years into it now. But that, again, your biggest strength is often your biggest weakness. And this issue has to do with the patient and user experience. When we got went through this experience the first time ourselves as patients, it cost us like $2,500 to see the doc. And then we had no idea what the labs were going to charge us. First, they charged us $2,000. We paid that. They charged us $2,000 more. They paid that. They started charging us more. We went to see some experts in this area and finally we were advised to tell the labs, we're not going to pay you anymore. Just stop. And they did. So that is not a good patient experience. We were able to get rid of several things. We were able to to hone down on the most important labs. Still not quite enough because of the expense, because of the way the system worked. We still had more of a bulky, large lab panel. Haven't been able to focus yet on terms of rifle shot, get the exact most important things that a patient needs at the time the patient needs them, not bundling up a huge number of labs and hitting the patient in the face with a fire hose of information. Let's start feeding it as it can be digested. So the labs had problems in terms of, I mean, it was great. It gave the patient a dashboard in terms of what was going on with their metabolism. And as you see on the comments on the channel, we get a few each month where somebody says, well, hey doc, I took some of your labs and I don't have pre-diabetes. I've got full-blown diabetes. And my doc's been telling me I don't have any problem. So you saved our life. So you can't get that kind of, it's been very gratifying. It's been very exciting. You're not going to get that kind of gratification of saving somebody's life out playing golf or traveling. So it's been wonderful. But again, the labs may be a huge strength, but they've also brought a lot of weakness with them. So I've been looking for, from day one, for a way where we could get a lab experience set up where you could do it at home, where the cost was bundled up in the cost for the healthcare evaluation, the consultation itself, where the explanation for the lab results was available on a pull basis. We learned that back at Toyota. In other words, somebody having to wait until we push it to them, they pull that information. So a lot of things we've been working on. I've got a friend named David Vigorous. He's a world-class laboratory scientist, faculty at Vanderbilt in this space. And I met him through another friend, a fellow named James West. And actually, this is going to, the partnership that we've just developed is going to bring both David and James onto the team with a lab team where we can do the labs at home, where we can start bundling up those costs in terms of you pay one overall cost, the lab's included in it. You don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for that. You don't have to worry about all those extra bills. You don't have to worry about all that crap. You just get the information that you need to protect your health, and you get it in a way where you can digest it. Now, have we completed all of that? No, we haven't gotten all of that complete, but we're going to go through some of that story today. James is actually coming on board to help us get this information out, to help us develop the proper lab panels that patients need, and actually helping me in some of the announcements and some of the explanations. So I'll actually be bringing James on in just a minute to help us get started. There's a lot more to talk about. I'm going to leave that alone for now. And actually, let me go back and see. James, are you back yet?
I am back. I've got background noise, but I am back and I'm here when the time comes. I'm looking forward to introducing and talking to your team, Ford.
Okay, so let me, since you're back, let me just give the group a little bit of information about your background, and then let me hand it over to you for a minute. You can go as long as you need to introduce what we're doing. But first, let me introduce you. So James West, actually, I used to work for him. Now he works for me, and I think both experiences have been a lot of fun. James actually came to healthcare delivery through a very different group, market, industry, finance. he first started off in the finance industry in a teamwork, a partnership with Dave Ramsey, you know, the get out of debt guy. So he went on, in terms of his experience in finance, to end up buying a medical lab. Things went south in terms of the market for the medical lab industry right after James bought into that. He had to do a pivot, and he went a very interesting space. He turned and went into a human genetics lab. It's called My Genetics. You can look it up. They still exist. James is no longer, he's exited that. But it's a great lab. In fact, My Genetics is the one lab that still has public access to haptoglobin. Now, if haptoglobin doesn't ring any bells, one of the major reasons it doesn't ring any bells is because it's so hard to get access to. But many people would say it's actually the most important genetic test. We'll get into that a little bit later. If you have any question about what haptoglobin is, you can look it up on our YouTubes. I've got several YouTubes videos about haptoglobin, H-A-P-T-A, I think, G-L-O-B-I-N. But anyhow, back to James and introducing him. So My Genetics was a great experience, especially for a first experience in helping create services in the healthcare space. James then went on, after leaving My Genetics, to buy a couple of networks in Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage is like genetics. It's the future of a major portion of healthcare. Medicare Advantage was just an experiment down in South Florida for Medicare, 15 years ago? And it has grown. And just like anything that's growing and becoming the standard, there's a lot of, you'll hear a lot of criticisms. I've seen a lot of the bad things that can happen in a Medicare Advantage environment, but there are reasons, extremely good reasons, why value-based healthcare is becoming the standard and will continue to become the standard. And let me just tell you, from my perspective as a prevention doctor, there are reasons why I've been very interested in it. People tend to think of Medicare Advantage still as Medicare for poor. It is good for the poor, but it's also something that's going to become very, very appropriate for the wealthy too, because it's something that, and everybody in between, for everybody, instead of focusing on sick care, value-based healthcare is turning us toward prevention. Now, again, James has exited that, and now he's gotten back involved with us. Let me tell you the last part of the story, and then I'll hand it over to you, James, to talk a little bit about your next steps. So every month or two, I met Dr. Vigorous. You remember the Vanderbilt faculty lab scientist? I met him working for James at My Genetics. And as soon as I founded PrevMed, as soon as Janice and I started PrevMed, I started pinging James and then Dr. Vigorous. When are we going to get to a home-based, more flexible, lower cost, all the things I talked about, lab solution? And sure enough, about 3 months ago, the call that I made to Dr. Vigorous, he said, "Oh, Ford, you know what? I've been meaning to call you. I'm working with a lab now, and it's excellent quality. They're still building their panels. But here, let me get you on the," he said, "I'll give this Yanni, who's the CEO, I'll give Yanni your name." I said, "No, David, don't do that. If you're okay, you hold on, give me Yanni's number now, and let's call him now." So we've been working very hard over the past 3 months to get this up and rolling. Are we ready to start selling panels, making that accessible now? Not quite yet. James will give you a little bit more background on that. And in fact, James, what I'll do is hand it over to you if you're ready.
I am ready. Thank you, Ford. Thank you for the introduction, although it's painful to listen to your, roll over about yourself. People talk about it. I soon talk about something else, but thank you very much. Excited to be on this call. Excited to be introduced to your listeners, to your followers. You and I have worked for years together in this passion of prevention, and I'm excited to come on board and help you guys solve some of these issues and some of these problems. And both of us I said it, Ford and I together, it's like the Laurel and Hardy. We both have the face for radio, but here we are with people being able to stare at us and look at us. But it's great to be here and be a part of this. What you talked about that is exciting, a few years ago, you didn't mention this, but almost every time we talk about this, someone asks the question. So I anticipate that someone will bring this question up. What about the Theranos story? You remember the Elizabeth Holmes from California lady that said she was coming out with micro container testing and it was going to revolutionize the world. Well, the truth is that technology does exist in some levels, in some places, and it's an exciting technology that can use nanotechnologies, microtechnologies to be able to do lab work. It's just, we haven't found an outlet where there's a large enough demand to use that technology because the pain points haven't been enough for the average patient to stop going and draw their blood from the traditional venipuncture to a micropuncture or to some other technology. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently going through, it limits people's willingness to go into these patient draw centers or to go into their patient centers with their hospitals or doctors. And so there's been a resurgence of investment back into this technology. And what happened with Elizabeth Holmes, the fraud that occurred obviously with Theranos, is it also dulled the market a little bit, where those companies that were, like AmAware, who were developing this micro technology and successfully deploying it, it did happen their investment models and people were not as interested in pursuing it. Well, now that has become revived. And so we're excited to see that there are technologies to run this testing that we will be introducing to your groups, to your patients, to your followers. And there's also other technologies. If you watch television now, you see the Libras and you see the Dexcoms and others where some around diabetes, these wearable devices are also taking advantage of this micro technology. So very exciting times are coming and changes are occurring, and this change is accelerated as a result of what we're seeing because of this pandemic. So although none of us would wish this pandemic on our country, there are revolutionary breakthroughs that will occur in medicine, much like warp speed in getting the vaccine to market. There will be a lot of clinical benefits from telemedicine to micro technologies that patients will receive the benefit as a result of the changing landscape of healthcare. So we're excited to bring some of those to you guys and work together to expand and make life easier for patients.
Well, thank you. If you don't have anything else, I'm going to go back to our regularly scheduled program.
Oh, absolutely. Well, good to meet everyone, and excited for what the prospects will be in the coming as we work together on these types of Facebook Live events. So, people, I'm comfortable sharing my my challenges with technology. Yep, I'm a boomer, and technology. I didn't grow up with an iPad in my hand. So some things take me a while. We put this blog out. It's Jerry Kurth's story. Jerry shared it with us. Jerry's makes a great case that he's actually reversed his calcium score. You can actually see it on our website now. Chris posted it a week or two ago. And here's what happened to me. I was looking at our page hits. We've started to get hundreds of page hits on Jerry's story, the blog.
the written version of that video. And again, it's not just the captions. He totally rewrote it so it's more understandable in writing. And I said, well, you know, so I went back to look for the email that came, you know, the PrevMed email. If you're not getting it, you should call us. You should email us at myhealth@prevmedheartrisk.com. I couldn't find it, and so I told Sam, I'm not getting the PrevMed emails. Well, what happened is, evidently, we're still not sure yet because we don't have the sources, but evidently this all came from Facebook. So many of you are coming in now from Facebook. You're beginning to discover us there. And again, evidently many more than I was aware of. Great story. Take a look at it, and take a look at the website again. We've had some problems with site speed associated with some technical issues. Sam's getting that cleaned up, and we're starting to make, again, a much better user experience. So in terms of getting the book out, we wanted to get a few topics out to make sure that folks understand some of the concepts that are in the book. One of the things that we talk about in the book is the, quote, unnecessary triad, and that is going in, getting a stress test, which leads to a cardiac cath, which leads to a stent, all of which have plummeted since COVID-19, and all of which patients up until now have assumed were critical to life. Well, my son's a grocer. He works in the meat department at Kroger. Purchase of meat, purchase of groceries has not plummeted. Jeffrey's work has not plummeted. But stress tests, cardiac caths, stents, I saw one article that said they had decreased by over 50%. If those were that life-saving, that necessary for life, why did they stop? We'll talk about that a little bit more, and the book talks about it as well. And just to let you know, I'll just make this one comment. Again, whenever I go there, we get up, you know, whenever you go anywhere on YouTube, you get some haters, and I'm going to get some haters that say, look, you're crazy. You're telling me my stent didn't work. I'm not telling you stents didn't work. And let me say this, and remind me if I don't say it every time I bring this up. Stents save lives, about 10% of them. If the stent is done as a part of a treatment for an ongoing heart attack, they're removing the clot with it. They're opening up the artery. They work for that. They just don't prevent a heart attack. And guess what portion of stents are done to prevent a heart attack? Spoiler is 90%. So here we go. If you're interested in some of the other content, dentists, why would dentists be involved in looking at prevention and prediabetes? Very, very good reasons. In fact, there are many, like what, 22 million a year, who would not get care for this if dentists were not involved. Unfortunately, most dentists are not involved. We go a little bit more into depth in terms of stress tests and what they can and cannot tell you. And we go into supplements, about supplements that are helpful for COVID. Specifically, the story about vitamin D3 and COVID. James sent me something last night. I forgot one comment in terms of introduction for James, and that is this. Having been a serial chief medical officer, I've worked with a lot of non-medical people who are running programs in medicine. So they have to have some level of understanding. James tops the list. One of the things I've respected about James from the very beginning is that he has learned the technology that most non-medical people just don't take the time to learn. So the reason I brought that up was he sent me an email last night with an article that just came out saying, talking about vitamin D3 and COVID. That's one of our more popular videos. And in this article, they were saying whether the vitamin D3 was up or down, whether the inflammation panels were up was a bigger issue. He and I haven't had time to talk about that. That's maybe one of the things we'll debate a little bit later as we go into this series. We'll talk about this series in a few minutes. It's called Health for the Holidays. We're putting the Got Sugar webinar on hold for maybe a week, maybe a couple, maybe a little bit longer than that. We're doing some reconfiguration of our access programs. If you have a major concern, let us know. We'll figure out a way to get that help for you when you need it. Chris and Gilbert, sorry about this image. I wasn't able to get it replaced. They sent it. They said, you know, Doc, you look sort of like the Green Lantern or something with big white mask around. We'll get that fixed later on. But the point is not my image. The point is, if you've had a positive calcium score, that's one of the major reasons why people come to see us. Doc, I had 4 patients yesterday. 2 of them came to see us because they had a positive calcium score. Don't panic if you've had a positive calcium score. In fact, we're setting up webinars to where you can find out easily and far less expensively. We're also setting up other ways where you can help, where you can get the help you need if you've had a positive calcium score. As I said, supplements are always one of the big favorites. No, you can't supplement your way out of a lifestyle problem. But yes, supplements help. We talked about it with vitamin D3. Niacin's a big help. The other one out of my top, I think my top 3 would be vitamin K2. There are a lot of positive things that we can get from supplements. Most docs don't get that much information on that. I had to get my information on it post medical school. So, but again, they're very important and they're one of our more popular topics. James is coming on to help us reconfigure these, the subscriptions. A lot of the subscriptions are becoming more and more popular. A lot of people would much rather budget their healthcare expenditures this way. And at the end of the day, you know, how do you put a price on living 20 years longer? So for those of you who want to get a quick and easy, very inexpensive start, in less than 2 hours, you can learn more about inflammation, cardiovascular inflammation, plaque, cardiovascular plaque, or insulin resistance than your doctor knows. I would say only about 99% of doctors. The other 1% will know this, but maybe not even that many. If you'd like to get a core curriculum, we have that available through the Louisville webinar, the Louisville course. This is the book. It's coming out. The publishers had it for about a month now. We saw some things on the cover. I think I gave up on trying to convince people about cover issues. I'm just letting them do what they want to do. I don't think the cover is going to be exactly what I want, but the text is there, the content's there. It's sort of like the old days with holding shaky paper in front of a webcam. It's the content. If you haven't seen our website, go take a look. And as we mentioned last week, we now have access for our information to you through podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Breaker. And if you want to go back in the replay, this will tell you exactly how to find it. Now, the 2 items that we wanted to cover on the program real quick. One is the N of 1 trials. And again, I'll get a lot of haters on this too. But it's information that needs to go out there. These people did a series of experiments with people regarding statins, side effects of statins. So here's what they did. James Howard presented SAMSON N of 1 trial at an American Heart Association meeting. Patients really do suffer from statin side effects. Symptoms are not caused by the statin molecules. They're caused by sometimes just by the act of taking a tablet. We're not saying, let me just before you get upset, let's just read the rest of it. They're almost as bad as if they're taking a placebo. How's the SAMSON trial performed? They took 60 patients who had previously taken a statin and stopped due to intolerable side effects. 4 bottles of 20 milligram atorvastatin, Lipitor, 4 bottles of placebo, and 4 empty bottles every month. And I would say placebo, 20 milligrams, I don't use Lipitor, and I don't use 20 milligrams Lipitor. So for several reasons, which we can talk about later if anybody has a question. Every month in random order, patients were told which bottle to take. Daily symptom check-ins were given on a smartphone. Bad symptoms were rated from 0 to 100, and you see here where those symptoms were listed. After 1 year, researchers showed patients whether their symptoms were worse with statins or placebo. 6 months later, researchers asked the subjects if they went back to the statin after their discussion. Here was the results. When subjects took nothing, they actually had very minimal symptoms. But when they took a placebo, it was 90% as bad as the symptoms of taking a statin. There were 71 instances where patients stopped taking the tablets because of bad symptoms, but only 40 of those 71 were they taking the statin. The rest were taking the placebo. After showing the patients the results after 1 year, 30 of 60 patients went back to take statins 6 months later. So here's a couple of explanations. One is the nocebo effect. Statins are making people feel worse because they're expecting it. With periods of statins, placebo, and no treatment, researchers were able to show that the nocebo effect is really powerful. It does exist in the statin arena. Now, maybe the tablets were not doing anything, but at their age, patients do have arthritis, they have aches, they have pains. You know, we're baby boomers, we have challenges. And maybe they blame some of those symptoms on that. Now, here's some arguments about it. While elegantly done, SAMSON didn't use a washout period between treatments. This might have biased the findings. What that means is, especially with some of the statins like Lipitor, you really should wait a week to make sure that there's still no statin left in the system before you attribute no symptoms. And that's a very accurate point. Dr. Salim Virani, ACC Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease Council Chair, said that SAMSON shouldn't make doctors dismissive of statin-related muscle or other symptom complaints. I would agree with Dr. Virani. Can't help but go off script just a second and add some of my own comments. As I've mentioned before, I don't use Lipitor. I don't use high-dose statins. I don't use statins for LDL. I use usually either low-dose rosuvastatin, Crestor, or low-dose pitavastatin, Livalo. And that's for cardiovascular inflammation. It's not for lowering LDL. These higher dose statins do tend to have problems. Now, you'll hear a couple of comments about that a little bit later as well. Doctors need to take complaints head on. The usual strategy of finding a different statin is reasonable. Another editorial comment I have to add, if you go back and you look at Framingham, we've talked about that multiple times. Framingham is the set of questions that the doctor asks usually before they'll start you on a statin. You know, they know how old you are, they know what gender you are, they know, whether you've smoked or not, look at your LDL and decide whether or not they want to put you on statins. Framingham is the town in Massachusetts near Harvard where they developed all of these formula for this. The formula overestimate the probability of risk. Therefore, as in a factor of 2, especially for women, therefore, any of the statin recommendations based on Framingham are likely to be twice as likely to put you on a statin as you may really need. So there's a whole bunch of problems behind statins. Anyhow, I'll read the last comment and then we'll move on. Howard argued that starting patients at a low dose and increasing the dose may send the message that side effects are to be expected at a certain dose. So that gets into a whole debate, which I think is actually valid. I would take the other side of that and say that level of statins does make a difference. Dosage does. So let's go on and let's make just a few more minutes on today's special topic, and that is the unnecessary triad. So here's the unnecessary triad. Positive stress test means you may have blocked arteries. That's not so much the problem as the problem that about a fourth to a third of these are false positives. The other bigger problem is what happened to Tim Russert. About 2/3 of the people that are going to have a heart attack or that have a heart attack don't get blockage. They don't have that much plaque yet. So anyhow, if you have a positive stress test, you'll be probably they'll want to take you to the cath lab for an angiogram. The angiogram usually detects atherosclerotic plaque. Doesn't matter if the plaque is big enough to cause a blockage. If the plaque is detected, and depending on what the cardiologist thinks, you may be recommended a stent or even a bypass. Unfortunately, actually I'm less concerned about unnecessary stents and unnecessary bypasses. I'm more concerned about this next statement. Stents and bypasses often create a false sense of security, both for the doctors and the patients. So you've got a lifestyle problem. You think it's a plumbing problem only, and you think I'm going to fix it with plumbing. That doesn't work. Just like you can't out supplement a lifestyle problem, you can't out stent, you can't out bypass a lifestyle problem either. This progression from stress test to cardiac cath to stent is tragically common, and it's often unnecessary. In terms of cost, it's billions of dollars each year. If the stress test is a false positive, all that stuff is for nothing. Cardiac cath, it involves inserting a cath, long, thin tube into a blood vessel in the groin or arm. With the cath, docs perform diagnostic procedures like angiogram and treatments like the stent itself. An angiography combines the catheterization, X-ray, and dye injection, radioactive dye. Here's the cath you see right here. They threaded it in. They threaded it in into an area, gave the injection of the dye. Then you get a picture of the arteries, and then you get that little arrow there and there showing some, having a senior moment, what's the word? A smaller diameter. The assumption is, well, then that's about to close off and cause a heart attack. That's not how heart attacks occur. Let me go back to the script. Coronary angiography is known by other names: arteriography, invasive or percutaneous angiography, interventional angiography, or catheter angiography. Catheter cath, or a cardiac cath with dye. A coronary stent is a small mesh-like tube, like here. You take it to one of these pinch points, you thread it through, you expand it, and the theory, the assumption, is that that will keep you from having a heart attack. It's an incorrect assumption. So in the US, there are about 2 million stents done each year. Again, like I said, that was until COVID happened. And the placement of these stents, again, has plummeted. There's still not good research showing how much yet. That's going to take some time. Doctors and patients assume stents fix the problem. The science shows that it doesn't. And again, I'll get tons of haters, and you'll say, you're telling me my stent didn't work. I had pain before then, I don't have pain now. I'm not telling you your stent didn't work. Like I said before, stents save lives, about 10% of them. the other thing I'm telling you is, I'm not telling you one thing or another. I'm just reporting the science. And the science, look at the Courage trial, the ORBITA trial, the ISCHEMIA trial. The Courage trial, as you see here, was, I believe that was, ORBITA was in, well, I'm not going to go into, I mean, these were like New England Journal, JAMA, and Lancet level. These were leading medical journal trials. So the Courage trial reported placing a stent in and unblocked arteries failed to reduce the risk of death, heart attacks, or cardiovascular events. The ORBITA trial. The ORBITA trial was interesting. It was the one that was done in England because American human subjects committees would not agree to putting somebody in a study where you said, you need a stent, take them into the OR, prep them, do all that stuff, put them to sleep, and then not do a stent. That's exactly what they did. The study group got the stent. The placebo group did not get a stent. And guess what? Those who had a stent were no better off than the ones that didn't have a stent. And this is for treating angina. So again, don't write me and tell me that I'm crazy. I'm just telling you what happened in the study. I know that's very hard for a lot of people to believe. Ischemia trial. So, you know, the Courage trial, ORBITA trial, some of these others started really making it clear that maybe the stents are not preventing heart attacks, guys. Well, does that mean we should just go to bypass? Well, the CABG, coronary artery bypass graft. That's what a lot of people did. They started going to the bypass. Well, the ischemia trial showed that stents and bypasses no more effective than drugs for treating stable heart disease. So again, you can't do plumbing to fix a lifestyle problem. Risks and downsides. Mortality rates, it sounds awesome and gruesome. You're sticking a needle into the groin, you're threading a catheter up into the heart. Yes, that's a problem, but frankly, I'm not quite so concerned about the danger associated with that. As I've said before, I'm concerned about the false positive, the false negative, the false assurances that people get from having these procedures done. 800 to 2,500 deaths occur annually from angiography and attributed to the angiography. And I don't think that that all of those should be attributed. I mean, because you're not going in there unless you have high risk already by definition. Now, as I've said, we get a lot of people that go in there that really don't have high risk. They just had a false positive test. And again, we send a strong message to the people that don't go in there. You don't have risk. But anyhow, a lot of high risk people do end up getting into this process. Some cardiologists think caths are risk-free. They're not. Actually, a friend of mine used to run a cardiac cath lab. He walked in one night and one of the cardiologists was doing a cath on the other cardiologist just so they could see what it was like. These cost about $20,000 a piece. And again, all I'm saying is let's look at the science, let's look at the evidence, and let's figure out, is this a plumbing problem or is it a lifestyle problem? There's radiation risk. Once you start adding angiography to these activities, the combination of a nuclear stress test, angiogram, and then stent placement, that together is one of the absolute highest exposures to radiation. And that's okay if you're really saving a life. But what if 90% of them are not? So I'm going to try to run through this quickly. I want to be able to get to our questions and answers. The assumption that the stress test, coronary angiogram, and stents route is the best way to detect and treat heart disease is killing and disabling more people than I think maybe in modern world. At least Chris thinks that. I think he's very close to right. I will tell you this problem is killing more people than anything in the modern world, and it's disabling. Heart attack, stroke, Heart attack is the number one cause of death. Stroke is the number one cause of disability. And in the UK, some reports recently said that dementia had overtaken both of those as the number one cause of death and disability. Bottom line, it's all associated with this one problem, burning the inside of our arteries. 80% of that happens with prediabetes, and we're not testing for that. We're subjecting people to this instead. So yes, you can make a strong case that this is one of the worst things that's happening in terms of health in our population. The stress tests, cath labs, angiograms, and stents are overused, and you have to admit, some of it's for financial reasons. If you don't believe that, read some of the stuff from Atul Gawande, Atul Gawande. There was a book, James, you may remember it. He did about 10 years ago. It started from a New York Times article about overuse of medical technology and seeing the patient as a cash register. They looked at that in a town called McAllen, Texas. It became a big, big deal in terms of helping us make healthcare cost containment policy for the country. Not going to go down that bunny hole, but however, these procedures can be life-saving when done during a heart attack. Remember that. Don't, if you're having an event, you need to be in the hands of a good interventional cardiologist. If he or she needs to do a stent, for heaven's sake, do that. Your life will depend on it. But if they're saying you've got a clog there, think twice before you do that. We want to emphasize there's a more effective approach for those who have time on their sides. That's why we must concern ourselves with evidence-based medicine. Again, look at what's actually happening. We need to avoid non-contributory procedures like nuclear stress testing, coronary angiogram, stents, bypass grafts, unless indicated, or if the patient is asymptomatic or is symptomatic. I talked with the doc yesterday. He's in the Long Island area. It's Dr. Dave. You look him up on Facebook. We did a video he'll post soon, and I'll have him on the channel soon. He's a preventive cardiologist working with a bunch of interventional guys. And I challenged him on some of this, and he said, look, I found your channel. I'm the one that I know exactly your position on these things. And yes, these things are overused, but think about a couple of things. Number one, don't forget that stents can save lives in the right moment. Exactly right. The other thing he said, and I brought it up in the book, what do you do if a patient comes in and they said, Doc, I'm going to have a heart attack like my Uncle Joe, and I know you can fix that. What are you going to do? This is not just a doctor problem, it's a patient problem as well. So today we went on quite a bit in terms of adding the announcement in. There are a couple of videos that we have. You'll see them in the links in the slides themselves. We're not going to take the time to go over those. I'm going to go back to the questions and answers, and we'll start that as soon as Gilbert gives us the water ball. So I'm seeing James is not on here. Or is there a way to show James's image? I think Janice said she didn't want him on there because he had that country boy lumberjack shirt on and t-shirt or something like that. But she also said I looked worse. So unfortunately, you got what you got.
I am here.
Okay, so we got a lot of comments, a lot of interest. Bob Weiss started us off with COVID vaccine. James and I were talking about that. I started doing some research on that recently. Here's Bob's question. As the vaccines get closer and closer, how do we choose which one is right for us? Age, underlying health conditions, type, construction of a particular vaccine, availability, etc. So here's the simple answer. A great question, Bob. And again, Um, James and I are planning on providing a lot more YouTube live content over the next month or so. And James, when I finish this part about the vaccines, maybe you can give a little bit of intro on that health for the holidays information. The short answer, Bob, is you're probably not going to get a choice, at least maybe until April, May, June timeframe. But I'll go into a little bit more detail. As most of us know, there are 3 vaccines, and I may get some of this wrong, but if so, I'm sure there's somebody there that'll fact check and correct me, and I'll appreciate it. We've got 3 vaccines. I believe the Oxford vaccine started yesterday in mass deployment in the UK. It's the one that is easier for storage. It doesn't require negative 80 degrees centigrade storage like the other 2 do. It's not the same kind of vaccine. It's a vaccine made from a cold virus, a normal, everyday, average cold virus. They put that spike protein from the coronavirus, the genetics for that spike protein, into that cold virus. So it's an existing technology, easy to send out, but usually takes a little bit longer to develop. They obviously moved quicker with this one. It does not appear to be quite as effective, but again, when you're talking like 90% and the other 2 being 95%, to me, I'd take it in a heartbeat. Now, James wouldn't. That's another. Neither would my mother. I think both of them are wanting to get a little bit more experience out there before they decide when and which vaccine they're going to take. And I think that's a very, very rational approach. That's a debate that James and I will have, I think, a little bit later over the next few weeks. The other 2 vaccines are the mRNA or Moderna, which most people are calling, and the BioNTech vaccine. Both of those are messenger RNA vaccines. Totally new technology. Advantage, much, much easier to develop. All they have to do is, they develop these off of, they got a head start on them because even before they got out of that much out of China, and clearly before they got to the US, but because they just got the RNA thumbprint, the genetic thumbprint for the virus. Then they started developing the RNA for this. Now, disadvantages. Number one, first disadvantage, there had never been any vaccines using this kind of technology before. I went over what messenger RNA vaccines meant. I went over some of the other vaccine technologies when we covered an article on this from Nature magazine. Hopefully, David Vigorist and I can cover a little bit more of that, James, as we over the next few weeks to make people give people access to that information. Another disadvantage to the mRNA vaccines is that they require significant refrigeration, like negative 80 degrees centigrade. That's cold. That's not what you have in your refrigerator in the kitchen, but it's not as unusual as you might think. There's a hospital about 3 miles down the road from us, and they have one. I have several friends there, anesthesiologists, and their rumor is that that vaccine may already be there in their 80-degree freezer. And obviously, the folks that are working in the hospitals with COVID-19 patients will be the first ones to get this. Folks that watch this channel, the boomers that are having health problems, clearly should be way up there on the list in terms of getting access to this. When I'm talking to patients these days, that always comes up. I don't know. My best guess, sometime before May, June, that we will, most if not all of us, will get access to a vaccine. And again, as I said, I was only partially kidding when I said that James, and I've got some family members as well. There are other people who are saying, not so fast. Let's just make sure that we know what we want to do before we sign up for that. part of the reason why I don't criticize that view at all. I'm a public health guy, and I know and have studied what's happened to populations pre-vaccine, before the vaccines were available. This is a different world, a different time, but you know, there have been major debacles with vaccines before, and that's one of the things I think James and I will want to cover when the time comes, in terms of looking at both sides of this deployment issue. Any comments, James?
I don't think so. I think it's a great question. There will be a lot of discussion around this, around the water tanks of the world, or on Zoom calls with family. I think if I were a healthcare worker, and pardon any background noise that you hear, if I were a healthcare worker on the front line seeing patients every day, I'd be more likely to take the risk to take the vaccine immediately. I'm just one of those that says, let's just see how this shakes out for the first couple of months, since healthcare workers will be the front line, and patients and facilities will probably be vaccinated first. Understanding there are just some terrible logistic issues, like you described with the freezers, to get it into rural America and to get it into places. One thing I would do, you and I have discussed, is I would look up, hopefully we can find a real good resource for your listeners for the antibody test. And your body should start producing, no matter the type of vaccine you choose, whether live virus, dead virus, recombinant DNA, you should start producing some IgM in about 14 days and some IgG by 28, 30 days. So we're looking, I know you and I have discussed, in finding a great, dependable antibody test that could be done at home. You could send out to people where they could start testing and seeing, I've been vaccinated, what's the result? Am I seeing, the symptoms? Because just today there was a statement released that 10 to 15% of people who receive the vaccine could experience significant side effects, which is worrisome for individuals. Will it make them sick? But secondly, then, before I go now expose myself, same issue you have with a stent, does that change your mentality? Where you don't change your lifestyle. But if I've been vaccinated in 14 to 21, 28 days, I'd highly recommend that we do an antibody test. Let's see if I'm building the immunity, and then test how long I'm keeping that immunity, like a Hep B test. A year from now, 2 years from now, do I still have that immunity before I expose myself to the risk, particularly as a healthcare worker, and expose others?
Very good point. When we get to a good point, remind me, and I'd like to have you tell the group a little bit more about what you're planning for rollout for some of our services for Health for the Holidays. I think part of that's coming up with this next question is IF, intermittent fasting, either 1 meal per day or 2 if I work that day. IF. In other words, Bob's telling us he's time restricting his eating, TRE, time restricted eating, or intermittent fasting. 1 meal per day or 2 if I work that day. I also limit carbs to 40 or 50 grams per day. My morning blood glucose is slowly falling a few points per week. How do I tell if the pancreas is storing insulin? I thought, Bob, that on that question you were going into this whole discussion about risk factors of prediabetes associated with COVID. And that's a big deal. James was reminding me yesterday, we need to start providing some of that content out there. I started working on that. Chris has found a couple of good articles on it. Chris is working on getting that, and we plan to have that available. This whole discussion of the linkage between prediabetes and COVID risk, which is, it's well known that risk is there. The question is how much of a risk and how do you deal with it? And part of that question is, given what Bob's doing, given what those of us on this channel are doing in terms of managing our prediabetes risk, how much does that help with conditions like COVID? And how do I tell if the pancreas is storing insulin? Well, Bob, that's a great question. Here's the thing. The question shows that you understand a lot more, actually more than most docs, and clearly more than a lot of patients out there. There are 2 phases of the insulin response. One is the first one, which is stored insulin. The second response the second phase is insulin that you're making. When you go to, I may be able to go back and find an image there. If you look at the Kraft Insulin Survey, there are, quote, 5 patterns. The first 2 to 3 patterns are basically loss of that first response. That's why Bob, I think, is so interested in knowing whether or not his pancreas is storing insulin. But I've taken that opportunity to go down maybe too much of a bunny hole. Short answer is that's what a Kraft Insulin Survey is all about, Bob. And that's one of the things when we did this this partnership, we formed this partnership. One of the things I kept banging on the I'm Aware folks about is we've got to have insulin. We've got to have a Kraft Insulin Survey available. And James has done a lot of work to make that possible. James, any comments on that before we move on?
No, sir. I think you covered it well. I think there will be very soon announcing a glucose test along with an insulin test by finger stick mailed to your home, hopefully available in less than 30 days.
Very good. So Chai Quentin, Dr. Brewer would love a video on blood work to get done. We would too. I mean, I've done some of that in the past, but that's like over 2 or 3 years old. And as I mentioned in the intro to the content today, there's a lot of changes, a lot of increasing flexibility we have. Let's not assume that it's all going to happen over the next 2 weeks, though. By the way, you're the best there is. Thank you so much, Chai. I appreciate that. Bart Robinson.
Comment on that statement for it if you want me.
I think you noticed. I did not ask for a comment on that. Thank you. Bart Robinson, good morning, everyone. Looking forward to the discussion as usual. Thank you so much for your interest, Bart. Millard, Millard, you got to tell us whether it's Millard or Millard. But good to see you. Good to talk to you and share a little bit more with us. Thank you so much for your interest. My BJJ. BJJ. James, you know what BJJ stands for? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Good morning from Temecula, California. BJJ, James, my BJJ is working. He shared with this group that his family has Lp(a). And he's working with some legal representatives to create more of a awareness and access for Lp(a). And part of that has to do with the lab issues. He said, you know, yep, I know that we can get Lp(a) labs from Quest, but we can't get them from LabCorp. Any comments about that?
No, that happens often. The developers, what happened, obviously you may know this, but the developers of certain tests, in order to get them to a marketing, plaque was that way for a while, Lp(a) was that way, is that they only allowed either certain devices or certain companies to distribute it as per their agreements, and that's one of those that has limited their distribution, because very early on, in order to get it to market, they had to cut deals that they would not have once they gained traction, and that's one of those.
So that's some of the ugly, difficult parts about inside baseball in the lab industry. Thanks for sharing so we know what we're dealing with. John Tocho, thank you, John. Good morning. And smash the likes and think about joining Patreon. Thank you so much, John, for reminding folks. And Gilbert, if you could just flash up that little sign up at the upper right-hand corner to give folks a little bit of understanding on how to do that in case they don't know. There you go. I see they covered up James's face. That's no comment about that. Maybe we want to leave it up there for a while. Just kidding. Eric Bobadilla. Doc, how to stable soft plaque. Thank you. So Eric, again, so there is, that's a long discussion, but it's lifestyle. The most common cause of soft plaque is inflammation. The most common cause of inflammation is poor blood glucose management. And yes, Gilbert, if you would bring those back down, I'd appreciate it. So there are other things as well besides just blood glucose management. But again, blood glucose metabolism on a population basis is about 80% of us. So first look there. The second thing I would say is don't depend on fasting blood glucose. Don't depend on even hemoglobin A1C. If you want to know why, we've got plenty of videos on those. Those do not help you diagnose this problem. You need to get an OGTT with insulin, which is called an insulin survey. So once you start going down that path, you'll probably find out that you need to start doing things differently in terms of diet, and diet, but also exercise and a few other things. Having body fat. Body fat we used to think was an inert energy storage tissue. It's anything but that. It's a very active, very aggressive endocrine tissue. It releases endocrine related items that cause a lot of these problems. Then there's the inflammatory diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, some other things which we won't list today, all of which can cause these problems. Lp(a) can cause it, FH can cause a little bit of it as well. But again, maybe going a little bit too far down the bunny hole. Vegas, not sure I understand that. Organic coffees. Imbal, this pandemic is only here because PCPs are not treating early. Technology will never fix a lousy doc. Well, not sure how to what to say about that. I will say I've spent most of my life as a chief medical officer, and so my life was herding cats. In other words, hiring, directing, and managing the performance of doctors. Doctors are like any other kind of people. You got some good ones, you got some bad ones, but clearly we can up our game. Not going to argue that.
Hey, Ford, I can comment on that real quick on something we discussed yesterday in preparing. As you've announced, coming very soon on Facebook Live, we're going to do some COVID-based sessions. And what he says here with PCBs are not treating early, I'll give you a quick anecdotal story that I'm hearing over and over again, is when individuals are experiencing the symptoms of COVID, they're going into these testing centers, whether it's the physician or drive-through, and they're being tested. But at those sites, it's astounding, they're not being given instructions. If you're going and you're experiencing symptoms, you must assume that you have COVID. You have to just say, I know our nature is to go, I don't have it, but I'm going to make sure. When in fact you should say, I must have it. Let me now move from this point forward under the assumption and behave in a way that I probably have it. And in those places, unfortunately, the healthcare system is not aggressively informing people on early steps that they could take to mitigate it. And one of the things we're going to talk about, I'm repeating what you've told me, but I think we're going to bear this out. It's the inflammation response that's creating a lot of this exacerbations. And that's why probably vitamin D levels are impacting the severity and the timing of it. Is it vitamin D, or is it really your immune response and your lack of inflammation response? So if you're driving the point home about inflammation, so anyone listening surely has to think in terms of what can I do to drive down my inflammatory response if I think I have COVID, up into such a point of self-care. Self-care is so critical to what we're describing in heart disease, and this point is very valid in that I wouldn't point it towards any specific physicians as much as the system itself is just not doing a lot of common sense things, which is really drill home the fact of personal responsibility, self-care, and creating some anti-inflammatory lifestyle choices during this pandemic.
That was a much better answer than I gave, James. Thank you. Do you want to share with the group the story you told me that you saw yesterday about
driving back from Nashville, Tennessee? Ford and I both live in Kentucky now, but we both previously lived in Nashville. I was driving through Nashville, and one of the newscasters themselves had been infected with COVID and told that very story, that when she went in for her testing, they gave her no information, even though she was symptomatic. And they said, we're collecting a specimen. We're not here to give you advice one way or another. Then it took 48 hours to get her response back. She tested positive. And then it took her another 24 to 48 hours before she could get information out of her personal primary care physician. So several days went by, was her complaint, rightfully so, before she could start getting meaningful care. And we know that this virus, very early on, getting ahead of it is what the key to success. It's the reason I think the president survived. Wasn't just some secret formula that no one else has. It was very early, aggressively treating it. Pre-treating it, we should do the things we talk about that would help you prevent the likelihood of capturing it. But early treatment, whether it's zinc, vitamin D, lots of fluids, there are things you can do as an individual to hopefully reduce the risk of having it. And of course, with diabetes and insulin resistance and having what seem to be either cytokine storms that are occurring or pro-inflammatory genetic markers, I think that story seems to be true as we hear it from patient to patient around the world, is you have to get ahead of this as best as possible. I'm not a physician. I don't even play one, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express, but that is me repeating what you've taught me for it.
It's a very, very good point. There's so much more. I mean, here's the thing. People are worried about this pandemic, and I am too. But when you think about the number of people that have become disabled and died during the pandemic phase from heart attack and stroke compared to the infection itself, there's still no comparison. We used to put both of those numbers up, and we haven't done it recently, but it was just like continuing to outpace it. So part of that message is, a lot of this is not in your doctor's hands, just like the rest of your health is not in your doctor's hands. Maintain your health. Do what you need. You need to do in terms of your lifestyle, and don't leave your health up to your doc. Mongo Fan 1, hello. Thanks for all your great work, Alex. Thank you very much, Alex, for your help. M-Ball again, temporary fix. Erland, how are you today? Doc, going for echo stress test next week. It was a funny question. Or it was ordered by my cardiologist. Got any advice other than don't do it? Don't know that I do. The next thing I'll say is, if he or she tells you, oh, I see something here, let's go to the cath lab, that's a much bigger problem. Please be afraid, be very afraid. So Chuck K, good morning, Doc. I haven't seen anyone that's doing more for us baby boomers. Your work, oh, thank you so much, Chuck. I appreciate that. Your work to improve our ability to understand our health challenges is very impressive. Thank you so much, Chuck. I really do appreciate that. Bonnie Lee, thanks. Thank you for your interest. Thank you guys for, the guy that's going to, the guy or gal that's going to impact your health more than anybody else is you. So thank you for showing that focus. Chai Quentin, berberine for LDL. Berberine and bergamot, both of them have some interesting impacts. Both of them tend to help with both blood sugar and with lipids, LDL, cholesterol. Jonathan Hull, good morning, Dr. B. Do you happen to know whether functional medicine dentistry is a recognized specialty? They take a holistic approach to health rather than just drill, fill, and bill. So you've heard that term as well. James knows, and I've introduced, well, actually, James knew Dr. Doug Thompson, I think, before I did, and I've connected those two a few times. Doug actually has been on this channel a few times, James. So, Jonathan, if you look up the Wellness Dentistry Network, WDN, you'll find a group of dentists who have basically volunteered their time because they can't make as much money doing this as your drill, fill, and bill type of dentists. But yet they have an interest in the patient's overall health. They're taking time, they're making trips, they're getting continuing education, they're learning how to deal with this specific problem. If you haven't seen them, take a look. Farouk Farr, good morning, Dr. Brewer. James Farouk has been here many times. He actually shared, he was in, I believe it was Iraq, one of the Middle Eastern countries, when it was ripping through, the virus was ripping through the first time. And he shared with us some of the stories. They were terrible. And he actually lost a young, otherwise healthy family member. Farouk is, I think, a physician there. My BJJ, what are your thoughts on air purifiers and water filters? I was skeptical of the true benefits, but then found clinical trials showing HEPA air filters reduce inflammation markers. I do think there's something there. I think it's clearly, like so many things, you can get a debate about it because some help, some don't. Depends on the situation. Depends on the actual filter itself. There's a whole lot. As I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, I was wondering whether or not these people that are taking flights, what's going on in terms of COVID exposure for them. And I heard a great presentation by a doc who used to consult in that industry, and he said, "I'm not going on a plane because the HVAC is backwards. What they do is the air comes out from the top, it comes and they push it down and they try to suck it out from your feet. What happens with humans is we heat the air, so when we exhale, we create a plume going up. So if they redirected it the other way, I might get on an airplane. But the way the design works now, all it does is create turbulence. So you get a lot more exposure than you really have to if we reconfigure. So that's a related story. It's not really straight to your point. I do think HEPA filters, if they're set up correctly, can work. James, you had some involvement with a company that was doing this. You have any comments about that? Environmental cleanup?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's just anecdotal but true. I mean, you see how people respond when they're exposed to sinus infections, inflammatory responses from asthma and other things. So just common sense says that's true. I agree.
So this is back to Erlen. Coronary calcium score 898. CIMT showed arterial age of 66. Internal carotid 2.4. Heterogeneous. Plaque measured 4.0 red. Still going for echo stress test. Does this change your opinion? Hey, Erlen, my cardiologist insisted on stress tests, so I reluctantly agreed. Waste of time, changed to cardiologist, got a CT angiogram with FFRCT to quantitatively check blood flow, skip the test. Oh, so I'm not sure about your comment, but it sounds like maybe you did skip the test for a CT angiogram, which I think is a great choice, Erlen. Bob Bell. Oh, that's Bob Bell's comment to Erlen. Thank you, Bob. Again, there are three things that I'd recommend before you get a stress test: CIMT, calcium score, and CT angiogram. Thank you very much. I don't read that language. I'm guessing you don't either, James.
He says, yes, I do. It says, James, you're a wonderful addition to this. And keep on being.
Bob Bell, my calcium score was 1907, early 2019. Last month's CT angiogram gave a great picture of arteries and also showed reduced calcium score of 1863. Congratulations, Bob. For those of you who don't know, Bob has been active in this community for a long time, has helped in terms of some of the forum activities, has helped clarify a lot of the comments. Many times I've gone in and have, when you do one of these channels, one of the ongoing responsibilities that you have is to try to get answers to people that ask questions. Bob has provided a lot of really good information. Thank you so much, Bob, for your comments and the work that you've done. Alex, is this ISRB drug invented at UCSF? Maybe the answer to reduce inflammation. I'm not familiar with it. I know there's a couple of new drugs out that we're going to be doing some information on. I don't know that, maybe one of them is ISRB, but it wasn't called that recently. Age cognition reversal drug. Chai, Bob Bell, was this out of pocket? How was the test experience? Covered by Medicare. Believe you need to request FFRCT for coverage. CTA is better than stress tests. Again, thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it. Actually, if I'd been thinking right, I probably would have said that too. Thank you so much, Bob, for being there. Dr. McCord. Kevin McCord is a physician. He's in this space. He's got his own practice called Last Chance Health near Cincinnati. He's a prevention doc, family practitioner with post-training experience and development in prevention. And Dr. McCord and I are talking about him starting to do some work for and with us as we start gearing up. Good morning, Dr. McCord. Good morning. 4 months before I survived a heart attack, my Framingham risk score was only 3%. Beware the clinical blind spots and false sense of assurance from our quote risk end quote calculator. Thank you so much, Kevin. Kevin also has some special experience and knowledge regarding fatty liver. We haven't covered that much. Thank you, Kevin. I'll move on. Chai Quentin, thanks, Bob Bell. Kevin McCord, very, very good point. No question. CIS1 or CIS-I. What about the SCAD, spontaneous coronary artery dissection? Is the cath lab needed for that? It's a very, very different animal, sis. Thank you so much for bringing it up. And I'm not the guy to ask about for that dissection. It's not a place where I end up spending much time. Joseph Bates, hello from St. George, Utah. Does getting a calcium score, CT, after a cabbage skew or negate the results? It does change the results. It requires some significant look in terms of reinterpreting it. We've got a lot of questions continuing. Got a lot of interest going on. Farouk Farr, could plaque be ruptured by angiogram? There's that theoretical concern. I don't think that's a practical concern, though. I really don't have as much concern about the actual danger and damage from doing these procedures as I do about the false sense of security. Jeff Godfrey, what about donating blood as part of the lifestyle change? There's been back and forth about that, but in the end, the evidence is still, any of the evidence I've seen has been pretty weak for giving blood for decreasing it. Some evidence, some potential, but I wouldn't depend on that. I think there are clearly better ways of dealing with risk. Chuck K, thank you so much. Thumbs up, guys, if you can. I think I see one thumbs up after all this work, James. In Joseph Bates, in his YouTube video, Dr. Junichi Sadashima, How to Maintain the Quality of Heart Cells During HF. He discusses fasting, autophagy as a way to heal heart disease. What would be a safe maximum days? It really depends on who you are, how much fat reserve you have. If you haven't read any of Jason Fung's books on fasting, I'd recommend it. Folks that have a lot of extra fat reserves, one of the more popular ways of doing a lot of extended fasting is every other day, on and off. That sort of flies in the face of what many of us know is that the worst 2 days on a prolonged fast is those first 2 days. But again, I'm not going to go that far down that bunny hole. There are people, I will make this one other comment. Somebody fact check me and remind us. There is somebody who's gone like, was it a year, half a year, year and a half in terms of fasting? It's amazing what kind of length some people have done. I think you need to be careful, though, in terms of figuring out what is healthy for you. Mr. Woods, would we see IgM 14 days after the first injection or the second injection? I think you can start getting it after the first. It's a great question, and I don't know where you learned that. I did a video, 6 months ago covering IgM, IgG, and what you tend to see in terms of responses to vaccines. The second one is usually a booster. The immune reaction starts happening with the first one.
And some people, they never change classes, right? They never go from IgM to IgG. And that's some of the concern for people with insulin resistance and heart disease and suppressed immune systems. Can they make that class jump? Which is concerning, because if you don't, I don't think you're out of the risk.
Yeah, that's clearly a risk area, and I'm not that deep into it. I hope that that David Vigorous can help us. If not, we can study a little bit more before we begin to go into that. It's a great question. Karen Black, no vaccine for me. Go low carb keto, keep your vitamin D level up, take related supplements, zinc, selenium, magnesium, quercetin, vitamin C, etc. My vitamin D 25 hydroxy level is 91, and my husband's is 112. Very good. I'm a little bit nervous about 112. I'll just tell you this. I have seen some negative side effects in the science. I haven't, well, actually I did. I mean, I had a video where a lady came to me and she had a very high level, and she did have an impact on her kidney function. We stopped the vitamin D supplementation immediately. She was going to a doc that used these 25 or 50,000 international units pills, and they're meant to be taken once a week. She didn't understand that. She was taking them every day, and she came to see me first as a patient, and I can't remember. I think her number was something like 125, 130, and we did look at her kidney function as a part of that. And again, there was a problem there. It reversed, and she did fine. Just be careful. I think 60 to 90 are much safer numbers. Like Millard. Okay, thank you, Millard. I appreciate that. Millard. Very good. Named after Millard Fillmore, the 13th president. James is a history fan. He probably knows a little bit about him.
I think he's from Maine. Certainly, he's one of the forgotten presidents in the 1850s.
Well, he lives on with Millard Woods now. Not so forgotten. Joseph Bates, I was able to get an ox LDL from the Cleveland Heart Lab, scored a 22. James, do you want to talk for a minute about the phosphorylated lipoprotein, or is it a little bit too early for that?
Just very baseline that should be available soon. I'm aware as presenting the studies to us that may be more of a meaningful peptide to look at, or another marker, as opposed to an oxidized LDL. Certainly the oxidation of the LDL is important risk to look at, particularly when you look at haptoglobin. If someone's insulin resistant and they have that haptoglobin genetic profile that creates the larger trimer, then the recruitment of macrophages is much higher, it seems, in those patients. So I think they're coming out with this what they're presenting, and we have to look at it more. I know you're studying that, and we're working with Dr. Vigorous and others to see, is that a replacement for OXLDL? But certainly Cleveland's one of the few places you can find that through now Quest.
Very good, thank you. I tell you what, we've got a lot more continuing questions, and we're going on an hour and a half now. How are you doing for time, James? You just went on mute.
I'm good. I got a little background noise that doesn't bother y'all, so I'll stay on mute. And but I'm happy to help you in any way.
Okay. I have a 1 o'clock patient. I'll tell you what. Let's see if we can do a few more, and let's see what we can do here. See if we can run through them. Chuck K, hey doc, in addition to my cardiovascular challenge you've helped me with, my other challenge is hormone balance health. Is there anything you can do to help us in that area? Most of us boomers are a mess. That's a very common question. Thank you so much for asking, and especially on the male side, on both sides, for females and males. I'm not an endocrinologist. I don't get deep into even the prevention side of endocrinology. One thing I would say is that a lot of, especially on the male side, want to talk to me about testosterone. There's a very practical, a couple of quick points. Number one, I used to actually be concerned. I was one of those people that was concerned about testosterone and cardiovascular risk. Not so much anymore. There have been some studies which have shown that they're really not the cardiovascular risk that many of us thought in the beginning. They also showed that they didn't accomplish, there was less evidence that they accomplished what most folks wanted them to accomplish than they did. But there's a very practical legal consideration that I have in terms of providing that. What most people don't know is that testosterone is actually a controlled drug in most states. So I've spent much time defending MD Live and other companies that do telemedicine in front of the boards of medicine for several states. Telemedicine has always had a target on its chest. Use of testosterone has a bigger target. So for that reason, in order to protect access to telemedicine patients, I have not gotten into hormone therapy. But thank you for asking. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to explain that. M. Maurice 100, niacin treatment for Lp(a). What markers need to be tracked to make sure it's working and or not causing issues? Well, I think the major marker is the Lp(a) itself. The other markers that other people don't have, they're not using, and therefore think that niacin doesn't work, is the inflammation panel. If they had an inflammation panel, they were watching the inflammation panel, they could see it go down, even though you may get a 25 to 30% decrease in Lp(a). So that is the key. That's a great question, Maurice 100. And that is maybe the most important missing link for most people that say, well, niacin doesn't work. They don't know that niacin doesn't work because they're not monitoring inflammation. James, any comment?
No, sir. I'm just excited about two questions coming up.
Okay. Do you want to go to those?
No, it's just a comment that says vodka helps too from Skunk Ape.
Okay. So John Bundy, so many professionals advocate their preferred diet like it's a religion. Thanks for helping us understand the science. And thank you so much for acknowledging and pointing that out, John. Yeah, I used to be plant-based for, gosh, almost 30 years until I became very interested in this space and began to notice that, I still, at this point, major change for me. I don't think it's plants versus animals. I think it's, I think it's carbs. And clearly, if you can't metabolize a macronutrient as big as carbs, you need to be careful on how much of it you eat. There's evidence coming out that even if you can metabolize it, it does create some challenges. That notwithstanding, there's a lot of conflicting good science out there too, and we've tried to share that. Thank you for the acknowledgement, John. Skunk Ape. So James, you and Skunk Ape want to talk about the vodka piece?
It's just a truism that needs no comment. It helps with a lot of things. I hear, not personally.
Right, I understand. So
I will say, take the opportunity for commercial. Previously, when you were talking about your diet, plant-based versus low carb, is we will be announcing very soon. I've received an email even during this call from Yanni. We will be announcing fairly soon this exciting new way to track a 10-day track using a device that will not be invasive, to be able to track as you eat and fast and follow your advice, be able to track your glucose scores without having to go through the normal laboratory work. So that's coming. It's coming very soon. We're very excited about that partnership with Abbott and what that could bring. So you may want to talk about that a little bit more.
Well, the first thing I'll have to say is there's only 2 devices that are out there where you can track glucose on a 24/7 basis. So I think you've already narrowed it down. But James is right. We've got, as you know, I've been a very, very big fan of, it's like most of us go through life. We do occasionally look at those of us who drive do occasionally look at the dashboard to see maybe how fast we're going, or whether the engine oil light's going on. But maybe there's something that's far more important. What is our blood sugar level? And how does it react to bananas? How does it react to healthy fruit? How does it react to oatmeal? How does it react to lentils? We've never known until affordable, continuous glucose monitoring was available. James and Yanni especially in his work in this area, does appear to be getting us access to a great new option in that area. So very exciting. Steve Mitchum, I agree with Chuck. You do so much to help and educate us. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate that, and Chuck as well. Damian McCrory, my heart rate occasionally jumps to 140 just walking upstairs. I'm otherwise fit and trained. I'm on Concerta. Should I be worried at all? It rarely goes over 160 when I'm all out hill running. Yeah, well, the fact that you're telling us, you're all out hill running as part of what you do, tells me that, again, there's probably not a whole lot of potential damage going on. But until I see a lot more information, I can't tell that there might be other things. For example, for those of us who get atrial fib, and that's by far atrial fibrillation, by far the most common heart dysrhythmia. Most of us get it when we just start getting, we'll get snippets of it and it'll go away. It's called paroxysmal. It happens in paroxysms and then goes away. I can't tell you that you're not having that unless we do a little bit more. It usually does not come in that kind of countable number, but quite often people will think they're counting that kind of number. So that's one of the first things I would want to take a look at, Damien. Great question. Gives me an opportunity to rant and rave a little bit about, we talk about how unknown and yet common prediabetes is. The same thing is happening with familial hypercholesterolemia. The same thing is happening with atrial fib. There are tons of people out there with these conditions. Docs don't know to look for it. They don't know to look for it. They think they're fine. And, they walk around with things like, oh, you know what? Every now and then I get these big increases in my heart rate. What's that? Well, it might be something. And here's the problem. Your risk for stroke increases dramatically if you do have even a paroxysmal atrial fib. You don't have to be in fibrillation all the time. It's a big thing to know about. Take a look. We've got a series of about 24 videos on paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. I went kind of crazy on it because I got it myself. Joseph Bates, do you have any opinion on the use of fibrinolytics such as Bolucay, lumbrokinase, and nattokinase? Are their effects exacerbated in a good way during fasting? I do have an opinion. I took a look at those, and there is some evidence, but the evidence seems to be very soft. And I don't know. I've said this, and I always get haters on that. I've said, I think part of the problem is they're a protein, and they probably don't get past the stomach acid barrier that well. And then I get all these haters that will say, well, you dummy, you don't know that these are put in enteric-coated tablets that protect it from stomach acid. And my response is, yes, I do know that, but when's the last time you looked at the effectiveness of enteric coating? So that's about all I have to say about that. Vagabond Sojourner, Doc, can a CIMT indicate no problem while a calcium score indicates a big problem? The key information I learned today, blood sugar markers and IR are tied together to drive inflammation. Absolutely. I'm so glad you learned it. If if one person learned that item, it's clearly worth my and James' time and a whole lot of investment, because that can change your life. That can be life-saving information. Now, back to your original question, I would say this. Actually, you tend to see the opposite. What do I mean by that? Quite often, you'll see a calcium score that shows moderate, mild. I've seen multiple calcium scores that didn't show a whole lot of calcium. For various reasons, we also had a CIMT, and what we found that was scary was there was a lot of soft plaque. Soft plaque does not show up on a calcium score. So that helps maybe explain why I said the opposite. You can see it's not that a CIMT indicates no problem, the calcium score indicates a big problem. What happens is you see a calcium score that indicates minimal to no problem, but you've got a much bigger problem in terms of soft plaque. Great question. Thank you for the opportunity to raise that issue. Charles Anders, what do you think about them finding COVID antibodies in the blood supply from last December, meaning it was here long before we thought? I'm not surprised that it may have been here before we thought. I'm not surprised that it may have been here in December. I would be surprised if we found it in blood from January of 2019. Any comment, James?
Yeah, I've read some of those studies and looked at it. The question is, what else? A big question is, what are we seeing when we see that in December? Are we really seeing this COVID, or are other things triggering those antibody responses? I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect there could be both happening. That's something else. Coronavirus itself's been a while. It's some version of coronavirus, showing up in the antibodies, depending on the antibody, how they're testing it. So there's a lot of variations to that question that as you dig into it. It's a good question. Some argue that it was in Europe before it was in China, but I think the evidence is coming out that it came from Wuhan. So whether it got here earlier or not, it's hard. It's just hard to know, but we'll certainly address that when we do this next week's seminar.
So good question and a great answer. I never thought of that, but it's a very obvious point. Yeah, there are other types of coronavirus out there. Simra Basivan, shared your wonderful lessons. Thank you so much, Dr. Berg. Thank you, Simra.
He found the vodka from the earlier comment before talking.
The reason we're laughing, Simra, is I'm Dr. Brewer, and Dr. Berg, Eric Berg, also has a channel. I get a lot of people that listen to me and to him, and a lot of people say, well, start comparing credentials and stuff like that. Dr. Berg actually has a lot of good stuff on his channel. It's probably about 10 times bigger than ours, or 20, but thank you anyway. Thank you very much. Joseph Page, my CIMT done at your Orlando seminar in early 2020 showed calcified 2.5 millimeter discrete plaque at 1 carotid branch points. Overall arterial age 55. Actual age is 72. Good for you. Congratulations. But calcium score was 20. Odd. Not sure why you would say odd. The only thing that's unusual, so here, a lower arterial age, lower than your actual age, tends to correlate very well with a very, very low calcium score. A calcium score of 20 for a 72-year-old man is fantastic. I think what you may be asking about as odd is that one calcified 2.5 millimeter discrete plaque. That's a relatively big plaque. You bring up a good point, and I don't want to go too far down the bunny hole, but it's a good question. It's a good point. We say, and you hear, plaque is not a localized issue. It's an arterial tree issue. It's a systemic issue. That's very true. But there are places where you tend to have flow issues. For example, if you're going to see plaque in the neck, usually the first place you're going to see it is in the bulb, where you've got turbulence. There's a reason why the left anterior descending coronary artery is called the widowmaker, LAD. It's because that's what tends to get plaque more than other places. So there is some truth to localization of plaque. And my guess from what you're describing, Joseph, is that you probably do have a little bit of turbulence there and are more likely, if you're going to form plaque, obviously that's where you're going to form it. I wouldn't be too concerned about a 2.5 millimeter calcified plaque if I had the other two findings that you've got. Congratulate yourself and keep up the good work. Good, H2O 11. So what are we to think about the COVID antibodies being found in the blood supply from December 2019? Well, I think, again, James handled that very well, much better than me. There are 50,000. Oh, I'm only see. Thank you, John. The way my system's set up, I only see one. Thank you so much for making us aware. 50 thumbs up. Appreciate that. Bart Robinson, thumbs up indeed. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Steve Mitchum, yes, Dr. Brewer. There's a man in Massachusetts who fasted for a year and lost 300 pounds. That sounds like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it? That's an amazing statement. And it makes a statement about a lot of different things. Thank you so much, Steve, for looking that up, doing a little fact checking for us. Erland, Jason Fung is a great 6-part series on the etiology of obesity. And for those of you who don't know, etiology means what's the study of the cause, what caused this. They're long, but really worth watching, lots of detail. I like Jason Fung's stuff. The only place where I get into a little bit of a disagreement with him is he says you can cure these things. I would say you don't really, quote, cure insulin resistance, the resistance of the insulin receptors, unless you lose a whole bunch of fat or things like that. But you do cure the diabetes. You do cure the prediabetes if you're with a lifestyle change. James Cantor, good to have you today. What range of vitamin D3 in your blood? Mine is 54. I target 60 to 90. James, you've been involved in that space. You have any differences, comments about that?
Because that's the accepted range, but there's a whole nother conversation on how labs determine acceptable ranges. There's therapeutic ideal ranges, and then there's the mean and the reversion to the means. But I think everything that you've taught me and that we've seen in the lab world is that 60 to 80 range.
So, and just to clarify, when James said that's the accepted, he means that's the accepted among most folks that are in the know. You still see it on most labs where they're saying 20 to 40, 30 to 40. They're seeing very, very low numbers as an acceptable range, and it's not. Joseph Bates, you need to take vitamin K2, MK7, high dose D3, then taking 30 to 50,000 international units per day. Joseph, please check that. That's very, very high. Yes, my D levels are sky high, but my calcium is just below normal. K2, MK7 moves calcium to the bones. No argument with that, Joseph, but people have died with vitamin D3 levels over 110, 120, clearly 125. It can damage your kidneys. I've got a friend who's a doc who had a patient do exactly that, and she did die. So please, Joseph, check your blood level. Bart Robinson, James, my D level is exactly the same. I take 4,000 international units a day along with 200 K2. The same as what? Do you understand that, James?
I do. He means reference to James Cantor. James Cantor said his was 54, so he's responded to that, James.
Okay, thank you much. Wrong, James. Joseph Bates, 30,000 per day, calcium. Okay, I got it, Joseph. I understand that. Please check your vitamin D blood level. If it's significantly over 100, 110, you please check that.
Yeah, he can go to imaware.health. Again, I got no benefit out of that, but ImAware's got a vitamin D test. He can get that at-home vitamin D test ordered it's not very expensive, and check that from home. It's a good test, and I think would be prudent.
So we're at our last comment. I have a patient in 10 minutes. We'll have to cover that and then run. Skunk Ape, your favorite. My dad is 94, eats mostly junk food, chews cigars, eats sugar, has lower cholesterol than me. What's up with that? Truth. You know,
imagine how long he'd live if he didn't eat junk food.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, James, for joining us. Thank you who have attended. Skunk Ape says, by the way, he rides a bike and eats rabbit food. He's given up. That's understandable. We all have our genetic burdens to bear. What's max calcium? 5,000 or more. I've got some patients, a lot of patients with 4,000 or more. I've got a couple of them at 5,000. You know, it's just a number. Once these people will come to me and they're crying about their heart risk. A lot of them are. After they get up and rolling, they understand what their risks actually are, what's driving them, and how to manage it. They feel fine. And they're very comfortable that they're going to live a long and healthy life. Great way to end. Thank you. Anything else, James, before we go?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing me on and for all the people participating. It's been a lot of fun.
Talk to you later. Thanks, guys.